as we came out of COVID, or even leading into COVID, the suggestion has been, and I worked in the mental health field myself, believe it or not. God, I've lived a varied life. Way back in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when I was the clinical assistant, as I think I might have told you, to the professor of the dean of psychological medicine, who was Professor Basil James, who went on to become the director of mental health. For a year, because I got my girlfriend pregnant, there's the truth of it. I took a year off my university studies. My history professor said, "Why don't you go and work for Basil?" So I worked as his clinical assistant for a year, and that was my introduction to the complexities and to the wondrous world that is mental health. And I've always had an interest in it ever since, as a consequence of the research, the work, and the speeches that I wrote at the time. But certainly mental health, it seems to me, in the late 1970s, early 1980s, was nowhere near as predominant a feature of our society as it is today. And there weren't, it would seem, a huge number of folk who needed urgent psychological or psychiatric assistance to the levels that we're seeing now. Something seems to have fundamentally gone wrong in our society. I sometimes think it's genetic. People are having children older, particularly white people, and as a consequence of that, the likelihood of having mental health issues in their children is more likely because, frankly, we're having children too late. What's the first child? Age? Average age for the first child for an average white woman in this country is 31. Well, you can imagine what the hell their partner is. And then you've got people having children into their 50s, including me. I often think, is that the reason? Is there some sort of environmental fact that we haven't worked out yet? Or is it just that there isn't a lot of resilience in society? But whatever there might be, there are massive waiting lists. Psychiatrists and psychologists. Try and find a psychiatrist. Good luck. And psychologists in this country. And as a result of that, the government has announced this week that they wish to introduce a new concept of an associate psychologist that will aid currently overworked and overstressed psychologists in assisting in providing mental health services in New Zealand. This has in turn drawn 200 psychologists under the leadership of clinical psychologist Laura Barkwell to sign a letter to the Minister of Health, Simeon Brown, and also to the Minister of Mental Health, Mr. Ducey, Matt Ducey, and the New Zealand Psychologists Board to try and nip this in the bud, because they say it is wrong and that it'll be unleashing essentially unqualified people upon people who need expert assistance, and expert assistance they're not currently receiving. All right, to join us, we've invited Matt Ducey to talk to us this morning, but I see that he's on Leah's program this afternoon. So we will talk to, instead, the opposition mental health spokesperson, somebody well known to platform listeners, Ingrid Leary, the Member of Parliament for Tairi. She joins us now. Ingrid, lovely to have you on, and thank you for your time this morning.
Hi, Michael.
You would have heard my introduction.
Good to be here. Yes, I did. You have had a varied life.
Yeah, I have, yeah. And I was just...
in that theory of older people, I had my last baby at 46. So
you see, I reckon you were pushing the envelope, and so was I.
Absolutely. When I looked at the charts of what to expect, I think I was called a geriatric pregnancy. It was planned, and I was blessed, and it was a natural pregnancy. But I think the charts stop at about 42 of what to expect. So I was way off the charts, and feel very lucky. And I do think it gives me a kind of an energy of somebody younger, because when you're running around doing things with your 11-year-old, you're in their world, and it's a blessing.
No, I'd like to think the same thing, but I think it's also aged me dreadfully, Ingrid, to be honest with you, particularly when they get to their teenage years. Listen, but
yeah.
Can I ask that question though? So if you were that old, how old was your partner? Because that's the other factor of the equation that nobody talks about.
Well, 12 years younger. I was interested in the assumption you made, and I thought, assumptions.
Yeah, no, you're okay then. You see, no, because usually your partner's older. So No, and there's quite a bit of research now, genetic research, to do with degraded sperm and degraded eggs leading to birth deformities, but also mental health deficiencies in children as well. So I don't know, maybe that's one of the reasons. What do you think the reason is for this plethora or this outbreak of mental ill health in New Zealand over the last 50 years?
Yeah, it's really complex, isn't it? I do think there's some credence in the book, the Height book, which talks about the impacts of social media across a number of countries and the, rewarding of a hate culture in that space that is then impacting on the mental health of our young people. And that's a little bit controversial, but it's interesting that the rise of mental unwellness across these countries has happened around the same time in the sort of 2010 onwards mark, which was, when social media really took off, I think. And so they were saying that ruled out other things that could be causal, like, internal politicking of those countries or the divide between rich and poor and so on, because it was traversing all these different socioeconomic demographics. I think there's some stock in that, and I think we do have to look as a society and across the house at this wild west of social media and gaming, actually, and the mental harms that it is causing to our young people. Perhaps a correlation between gaming that can lead to online gambling addiction and so on. So there's a lot for us to unpack. So that's one area. Are we calling it out more? So, rather than a
Yeah.
stiff upper lip, are we actually saying I have a mental well-being issue? I know certainly my daughter speaks that language, and it took me a while to get accustomed to it. And then I started to think, well, this is really good that someone is checking in on their own mental well-being. We didn't do that as kids. We didn't have that language. So I think there's quite a few elements to it.
Oh gosh, there are. I mean, we could have this discussion, and we should have this discussion, quite frankly. Devote almost an entire program, got a week to it, because it's something that seems to defy policymakers as to what the causes are. So unless you know what the causes are, it's very difficult to provide the answers. Well, one of the
Yeah,
answers,
and
anyhow, that's sorry.
I was going to say one more. Just there was a book that came out a while ago from a woman in the States who just looked at the impact of kind of the societal narcissism and the rewarding of, what is that family? The they had all
Kardashians.
those, the Kardashians, that phenomenon, and the kind of elevation of social media heroes through a narcissistic culture, and the fact that isolates people, and that the values of collaboration, hard work, and humility and resilience are undervalued in that kind of world, and I think that plays a part as well.
I'm not going to disagree with you on that. You're speaking my language. What's the matter with you, Ingrid? All right, now, New Zealand Psychologist Board, universities, the government, they're working on trying to identify ways in which they can address the enormous waiting lists that are currently excessive, and people need assistance now and aren't getting it. And as a consequence, Mental Health Minister Matt Ducey has come up with this idea, or I can't imagine he's done it by himself, of an associate psychologist. And I'll come to that in just a second. Before we do, has he discussed this at all with you?
No, and I think they did mention it in their manifesto. I'd have to check that. I think the problem is that it's a distraction from the real problem, which is that there are not enough clinical psychologists.
Correct.
And there are not enough clinical psychologists to train others. So by creating this new role, there's a number of issues, and I understand where those psychologists and the board are coming from, not only around safety and efficacy and pathways, what are the pathways for these people to ever go on and become full psychologists, but it's a bit of a distraction then to go, what do we do about the clinical expertise where there's still a massive gap there? We don't know whether these people will be supervised by, whether there's a requirement for them to be supervised. We don't know if there are pathways. And there are other therapeutic models, such as counselling, which already fill a bit of a gap that is different from the medicalised psychology role. So where does the associate psychologist sit in relation to that? Now, Minister Ducey was asked that and said in the media, talk therapies and so on, but counsellors do talk therapy. So I think there are a lot of questions for him to answer, and what worries me is I think it's a distraction from the real issue, which is putting resource in the right place to get the right expertise that we need.